freezes. Every woman adjusts her dress. Every man looks at the floor. Tosin just continues shaking a cocktail shaker and tells him the premium whiskey is double the price after midnight. The air in the Obsidian was thick with the scent of expensive oud and the electric hum of nerves. When the heavy double doors swung open, the bass didn't stop, but the breathing in the room did. Gwam stepped in, a shadow draped in a bespoke charcoal suit, his presence turning the humid club air into ice. Every woman in the VIP lounge shifted, tilting their profiles to catch his light, desperate for a glance from the man who owned half of Seoul's skyline and all of its secrets. Behind the bar, Tosin didn't even look up. She was busy muddling mint for a mojito, her dark skin glowing under the violet neon lights, her mind miles away in Lagos. To her, he wasn't a king. He was just another drink order holding up her closing shift. She didn't know that by the end of the night, the silent tiger of Gangnam would be obsessed with the only woman who refused to bow. If you crave high-stakes tension, forbidden chemistry, and a love worth breaking the law for, you're in the right place. Subscribe now to follow Tosin and Gwam's dangerous journey through the shadows of Seoul. Gwam didn't head for the velvet ropes of the VIP section. His polished Oxfords clicked against the marble floor, cutting a path straight to the center of the bar. His inner circle followed like a wake of sharks, but he raised a gloved hand, signaling them to halt. He stopped directly in front of Tosin. The silence around them was deafening, the kind of quiet that usually preceded a funeral. Tosin finished the mojito, slapped a napkin onto the bar for another customer, and finally turned. Her eyes, a deep, defiant amber brown, met his cold gaze. She didn't flinch. She didn't smooth her hair. She simply leaned her weight on one hip and tapped her fingers on the mahogany. "You're blocking the view of the shelf," she said, her voice smooth but edged with a Nigerian-American grit that Gwam had never heard before. "Are you here to order, or are you just admiring the glassware?" A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Gwam's eyes narrowed, tracking the movement of her lips. He wasn't used to hearing no, let alone being treated like an inconvenience. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, his voice a low, melodic growl in Korean-accented English. Tosin grabbed a clean rag and started wiping a spot on the bar. "I know you're the guy standing between me and my 10-minute break, so unless your name is Hennessy on the rocks, you're just another patron in a suit." For the first time in 3 years, Gwam felt a spark of something other than calculated rage. He felt a challenge. Gwam didn't leave. He sat on the chrome bar stool, his presence commanding a 5-foot radius of empty space. His bodyguards stood like statues behind him, their hands twitching near their jackets. "Soju," Gwam said, his eyes never leaving Tosin's face. "The expensive kind." "There is no expensive soju," Tosin countered, reaching for a green bottle. "It's all just firewater, but I'll charge you the boss price if it makes your ego feel better." She poured the clear liquid into a glass with practiced precision. As she slid it toward him, Gwam reached out, but he didn't grab the glass. He caught her wrist. The contact was electric. Tosin's skin was warm, a sharp contrast to his cold, calculated world. Her breath hitched for a microsecond, but she didn't pull away. She stared him down, her chin tilted up. "In Seoul, people bow when I speak," Gwam whispered, his grip firm but not bruising. "In Brooklyn, we talk back," Tosin snapped. "And in Lagos, we don't fear tigers. We know they're just cats with better outfits." Gwam let out a short, dry laugh, a sound his men hadn't heard in years. He released her wrist, leaving a lingering heat on her skin. He drained the glass in one shot, the liquid burning his throat just as much as Tosin's words burned his pride. "You have fire, Tosin," he said, reading her name tag. "But fire in this city usually ends in ashes." "I've been burned before," she replied, picking up his empty glass. "I'm still standing. Can you say the same for your enemies?" He opened his mouth to respond, but the heavy bass of the music was suddenly drowned out by a crashing sound at the entrance. The silent tiger, wasn't the only predator in Gangnam tonight, and his arrival had just tipped the scale. The crash at the door wasn't an accident. 4 men in leather jackets, members of the rival K. Campy Street faction, pushed past the bouncers. They weren't here for the music. They were here for the man sitting at Tosin's bar. Gwam didn't move. He didn't even reach for the weapon tucked into his waistband. He simply watched Tosin through the reflection in the mirror behind the bar. He wanted to see if she would scream. He wanted to see her break. "Hey," Tosin shouted, her voice cutting through the panic of the fleeing crowd. The music cut out, leaving a ringing silence. "The VIP entrance is in the back, and the looking for a beating entrance is closed for the night. Get out." The lead thug laughed, pulling a serrated blade from his pocket. "Move, girl. This doesn't involve you. The boss has a debt to pay." "You're in my workspace," Tosin said, her voice dropping an octave. Her Nigerian accent thickened, a sign that her patience had vanished. "And I don't like blood on my floor. It's a bitch to clean." The thug lunged, not at Gwam but at Tosin, intending to toss her aside like a prop. He didn't get the chance. In a blur of motion that even Gwam's trained eyes struggled to follow, Tosin reached beneath the bar. She didn't pull out a gun. She pulled out a professional-grade, high-carbon steel chef's knife she used for garnishes. With a fluid, rhythmic snap of her wrist, she parried the thug's arm. Before he could blink, the tip of her blade was pressed firmly against the soft skin beneath his jaw. Her other hand gripped his collar, pulling him chest to chest so he could see the fire in her amber eyes. "I told you," she whispered, her dark skin shimmering like polished obsidian under the red emergency lights. "I'm working. Don't make me clock out early." Gwam stood up slowly, his eyes fixed on the way Tosin held the knife. Her grip was perfect, thumb locked, wrist stiff, no tremor. She wasn't just a bartender, she was a practitioner. The other 3 thugs froze, their eyes darting between their captured leader and Gwam's silent bodyguards, who had finally drawn their firearms. "Let him go, Tosin," Gwam said quietly. It wasn't a command, it was a suggestion. "Tell him to apologize for the mess first," Tosin replied, her eyes never leaving the man at the end of her blade. She pressed a fraction harder, a single bead of red blooming against the silver steel. "Apologize," Gwam barked at the thug. The man stammered a frantic apology in Korean. Tosin shoved him away with enough force to send him sprawling into a pile of overturned chairs. "Out," she snapped, "all of you, and take your trash with you." The rivals scrambled out of the club, realizing they were outmatched by both the MAFIA and the woman behind the bar. As the heavy doors swung shut, the tension in the room shifted. It was no longer about a gang war. It was about the 2 people standing at the bar. Gwam looked at the knife in her hand, then at the calm expression on her face. Her beauty was undeniable, the deep, rich tone of her skin, the sharp arch of her brows, but it was her lethality that finally undid him. "Where did a bartender learn to use a blade like that?" Gwam asked, stepping closer until he could smell the faint scent of coconut oil and citrus on her. Tosin wiped the blade on a clean towel and tucked it back into its hidden sheath. "My father ran a butchery in Lagos and my brothers were idiots. You learn to hold your own or you get walked on. I don't get walked on, Gwam." Gwam reached out, his fingers hovering just inches from her cheek, testing the boundary. "You saved my life." "I saved my bar," she corrected, though the heat rising between them told a different story. "Now, are you going to pay for that soju, or do I have to get the knife back out?" The aftermath of the fight left the Obsidian in a state of shattered glass and heavy silence. Gwam didn't leave with his men. He waited until the police, who were firmly in his pocket, had done their cursory walkthrough and disappeared. Tosin was sweeping glass, her movements methodical. She felt Gwam's eyes on her back like a physical weight. "You shouldn't be here, Tosin," he said, his voice echoing in the empty lounge. "The K. Campy are like dogs. They don't forget a scent, and now they have yours." "I've dealt with dogs before," she replied without looking up. Usually, they just need a firm hand and a muzzle. Gwam stepped into her space, taking the broom from her hand. His touch was lingering, his fingers brushing against her knuckles. They will come for you to get to me. I cannot allow that. You are coming to my estate in Gangnam for your protection. Tosin let out a dry, sharp laugh. Protection? You mean a cage? I have a life, Gwam. I have a shift tomorrow and a rent check due on Monday. Gwam pulled a roll of one from his pocket, more money than Tosin made in 6 months, and set it on the bar. Consider your rent paid for a decade. This isn't a request, Tosin. It's a reality. You drew steel for me. In my world, that makes you mine to guard. Tosin looked at the money, then at the man. She saw the genuine flick of concern in his usually frozen eyes. She wasn't afraid of the thugs, but she was smart enough to know that a marked woman didn't last long in Seoul. I'm bringing my knives, she said firmly. Gwam's lips curved into the ghost of a smirk. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. Gwam's estate was a fortress of glass and black marble perched high above the neon arteries of Gangnam. As the private elevator chimed, Tosin stepped out into a world of clinical luxury. It was beautiful, but it felt like a museum, untouched and cold. Your room is the third door on the left, Gwam said, shedding his suit jacket to reveal the holster strapped to his broad shoulders. My staff will provide whatever you need. Food, clothes, security. Tosin walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city. It's a long way down. It's the only way to stay above the filth, Gwam replied, walking up behind her. He didn't touch her, but she could feel the heat radiating from his body. You're part of the filth, Gwam, she whispered, turning to face him. Don't pretend this glass makes you clean. He leaned in, his face inches from hers. The scent of sandalwood and expensive tobacco enveloped her. I never claimed to be clean, Tosin, but I am the one holding the door shut so the monsters don't get to you. Tosin reached up, her dark fingers contrasting beautifully against the pale, crisp fabric of his shirt. She gripped his tie, pulling him slightly closer. I've met monsters before. Usually, they're the ones wearing the nicest suits. The air between them thickened, the friction of their personalities finally catching fire. Gwam's hand found her waist, pulling her flush against him. For a moment, the world below ceased to exist. The tension that had been simmering since the bar finally boiled over. Gwam's mouth found hers, not with the gentleness of a suitor, but with the hunger of a man who had been starving. Tosin met him move for move, her hands sliding up to his neck, her nails grazing the short-cropped hair at his nape. He lifted her easily, her legs wrapping around his waist as he carried her toward the expansive, silk-covered bed. The transition from the cold marble to the soft sheets was a blur. Gwam was a man of control, but with Tosin, his control was fraying. He worshipped the curve of her shoulders and the rich, deep mahogany of her skin. Every touch was an exploration of two worlds colliding. You're dangerous, he murmured against her skin, his voice a wrecked vibration. You're just realizing that, Tosin breathed out, her eyes locked onto his. There was no talk of gangs or debts in the dark. There was only the rhythmic pulse of the city outside and the desperate, heavy heat of two people who knew that tomorrow wasn't promised. In the shadows of his room, the mafia boss wasn't a king, and the bartender wasn't a servant. They were just two fires burning in the same hearth. Tosin woke to the sound of a phone vibrating on a glass table. The room was flooded with the gray light of a Seoul morning. Gwam was gone from the bed, but the indentation of his head remained on the pillow. She dressed quickly, slipping into the silk robe provided for her. When she walked into the living area, Gwam was standing by the window, a phone pressed to his ear. His face was a mask of stone. Do it, he said in Korean, his voice cold enough to crack bone. He hung up and turned to Tosin, his expression softened by only a fraction. There was a hit on one of my warehouses this morning. They're getting bold. The men from the club, Tosin asked, crossing her arms. They were just the scouts. Their leader, Choi, is looking for a war. He thinks I've gone soft because I brought a woman into my home. Tosin walked over to the breakfast spread laid out on the table, picking up a paring knife to slice a mango. She handled the blade with a casual, terrifying grace. Let him think that. It'll make it easier when I cut his throat. Gwam watched her, a mixture of pride and dread pooling in his chest. He wanted to keep her safe, but he realized she wasn't a woman who stayed behind walls. While Gwam was out handling business, Tosin didn't sit idle. She used his high-speed encrypted network to make a few calls of her own. She might be in Seoul, but her brothers in Brooklyn and her cousins in Lagos had ears everywhere. Tosin, is that you? Why are you calling from a ghost line? Her brother's voice crackled through the speaker. I'm in a bit of a situation, Chitty. I need to know about a man named Choi. He's moving product through the Incheon docks. Who is he talking to on the outside? Choi? He's small-time, Tosin. But word is he's being backed by a Russian syndicate looking to push into Seoul. They're using him as a battering ram to break Gwam's hold. Tosin's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a turf war, it was an invasion. And Gwam, focused on the local threat, was blind to the international one. Send me the manifest, Chitty. Everything you have on the Russian shipments. Tosin, stay out of this. You're a bartender, not a mercenary. I'm a Nigerian woman in a house full of men who think I'm a trophy, Tosin snapped. I'm the only one who can see the knife coming. Gwam returned that evening with a gift, a dress the color of liquid gold. There is a charity gala tonight at the Lot Hotel, he said. Every major player in Seoul will be there. Choi will be there. I need you on my arm. I need them to see that I fear nothing. You want me to be a distraction, Tosin said, holding the dress up. It was beautiful, but she knew what it represented. I want you to be my queen, Gwam corrected, stepping close. Because tonight we end this, one way or another. Tosin looked at the dress, then at the hidden pocket she would have to sew into the lining for her favorite blade. Fine, but we do it my way. You play the tiger, Gwam. I'll play the shadow. As they prepared to enter the lion's den, the stakes had never been higher. Gwam thought he was protecting Tosin, but as they stepped into the black limousine, Tosin was the one checking the perimeter. The gala was about to begin, and the silent tiger was walking into a trap, with the only woman who could save him. The Lot Hotel ballroom was a sea of black ties, diamonds, and forced smiles. When Gwam entered, the air shifted. He was the undisputed son of the Seoul underworld, and everyone else was merely a planet in his orbit. But tonight, all eyes were on the woman on his arm. They're starring, Tosin whispered, her head held high, her Nigerian poise making her look like royalty. They're starring because you are the most beautiful thing this room has ever seen, Gwam replied, his voice a low vibration. And because they are wondering if I've finally found a weakness. Across the room, Choi stood surrounded by his men. He was older, with a jagged scar running through his eyebrow and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Beside him stood two men who didn't look Korean, tall, broad-shouldered men with the cold, blue gaze of the Russian Vori. Tosin caught Gwam's eye. The Russians, my brother was right. Gwam's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected the international backup. He realized then that the charity gala was actually an auction, and he was the prize. Gwam led Tosin to the dance floor as the orchestra began a slow, haunting waltz. It was a strategic move. In the center of the room, they couldn't be easily shot, and they could hear the whispers of the elite. If things go sideways, Gwam murmured, his hand firm on the small of her back, my driver is at the side entrance. You run, Tosin. You don't look back. I don't run, Gwam. We talked about this, she countered, her eyes scanning the balconies. She spotted a glint of metal in the shadows above, a sniper. She didn't panic. She leaned her head onto Gwam's shoulder, appearing to be the smitten lover. Balcony, 3 o'clock, don't look. There's a shooter. Gwam's rhythm didn't falter, but his grip on her hand tightened. I see him. He's waiting for Choi's signal. Then let's not give Choi the chance to speak, Tosin said. She pulled back, giving Gwam a dazzling fake smile. I'm going to the powder room. Cover me. Tosin slipped away from the crowd, her movements fluid. She didn't head for the restrooms. She headed for the service stairs. Two of Choi's men blocked her path, smirking as they took in her expensive dress. The party is that way, princess, one said in broken English. Tosin didn't waste breath on a retort. She reached into her slit, the steel of her knife flashing in the dim hallway light. Before the first man could draw his gun, she stepped into his guard, the blade finding the gap in his ribs with surgical precision. The second man lunged, but Tosin was a whirlwind of silk and fury. She dropped low, swept his legs, and ended the struggle with a quick, silent strike to the throat. She stood up, smoothing her gold dress, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. I told you, she whispered to the fallen men. I don't like blood on my floor or my dress. Tosin reached the balcony level just as the sniper was adjusting his scope, centering the red dot on the back of Gwam's head. Beautiful view, isn't it? Tosin said from the doorway. The sniper spun, but he was holding a long-range rifle, useless in a close-quarters hallway. Tosin didn't give him time to reach for a sidearm. She launched her knife. It wasn't a killing blow, but it buried itself in the man's shoulder, knocking him off balance. She was on him in a second, using her weight to pin him. Who paid the Russians? She demanded, her forearm pressed against his windpipe. Choi, the man wheezed. But the shipment, it's already at the docks. Gwam is dead either way. Tosin silenced him with a heavy blow to the temple. She looked down at the ballroom. Gwam was surrounded. Choi had stepped forward, a glass of champagne in one hand and a detonator in the other. Tosin made it back to the ballroom floor just as the music stopped. The guests were screaming, huddled in corners as Choi's men drew their weapons. Gwam stood in the center, a lone island of calm. Give me the keys to the engine port, Gwam, Choi shouted, or we turn this hotel into a tomb. Gwam's eyes searched the room until they found Tosin. He saw the blood on her hem and the fire in her eyes. He knew she had cleared the way. You want the port? Gwam asked, his voice echoing. Come and take it. In the chaos that followed, the smoke bombs, the gunfire, the shouting, Gwam grabbed Tosin, pulling her behind a marble pillar. For a moment, death was inches away, but all he could feel was her pulse. He pressed her against the cool stone, his body shielding hers. If we die tonight, he rasped, his lips brushing her ear, I want you to know, I never desired anyone until you looked at me like I was nothing. Tosin grabbed his lapels, pulling him into a desperate, hard kiss that tasted of adrenaline and smoke. Don't talk about dying. We have a port to burn. She handed him a secondary blade she'd lifted off the sniper. They stood together, the MAFIA boss and the bartender, ready to turn the hunter into the prey. The Incheon shipping terminal was a labyrinth of stacked steel containers and flickering floodlights. Gwam checked the chamber of his pistol, his face a mask of cold fury. They have the shipment in Section 4, Gwam said, glancing at the tablet his tech specialist had provided. But it's a kill zone. If we walk in there, they'll pick us off before we hit the concrete. Tosin looked at the layout, her mind working through the logistics she had learned from her brothers. You're thinking like a soldier, Gwam. Think like a businessman. They aren't here to fight a war. They're here to move product. If the product is at risk, they'll scramble. She pulled out her phone and dialed Chitty. Is the hack ready? 5 minutes, Tosin. Her brother's voice crackled. I'm rerouting the dock's automated crane system. Tell your boyfriend to get ready for some heavy lifting. Gwam looked at her, impressed. You have people everywhere, don't you? I'm Nigerian, Gwam, she smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. We don't just move, we build networks. The sky opened up, a torrential downpour blurring the lines between the sea and the sky. Under the cover of the storm, Tosin and Gwam slipped into the terminal. Suddenly, the massive industrial cranes began to groan. Without human operators, the giant metal claws started swinging, smashing into the containers where Choi's men were hiding. The rhythmic bang of steel on steel sounded like the drums of war. Now Tosin shouted. Gwam moved with lethal efficiency, his suppressed weapon barking as he cleared the perimeter. Tosin stayed low, moving through the shadows like a ghost. When a Russian mercenary stepped out from behind a crate, she didn't use a gun. She slid beneath his reach and drove her blade into the back of his knee, bringing him down to her level before finishing the job. She was a symphony of dark skin and silver steel, a shadow that the invaders never saw coming. They reached the center of the warehouse, where Choi stood over a crate of illicit cargo. He was frantic, shouting into a radio as his empire literally crumbled around him. Gwam stepped into the light, his silhouette framed by the lightning outside. The cranes were a nice touch, don't you think, Choi? Choi spun around, leveling a shotgun. You think you've won. The Russians have 3 more ships in the harbor. They had 3 ships, Tosin said, stepping out from the opposite side, her gold dress now stained with grease and rain. My brother just sent their coordinates to the Korean Coast Guard. Anonymous tip. Something about unidentified biohazards. They won't be docking tonight. Choi looked between the boss and the bartender. He realized then that he hadn't been outgunned. He had been outsmarted. Kill them, Choi screamed to his remaining men. The final skirmish was a blur of chaos. Gwam took a graze to the shoulder, the red blood blooming against his white shirt. Seeing him hurt triggered something primal in Tosin. She vaulted over a shipping crate, her knife catching the light of a stray flare. She landed on Choi's back, her blade at his throat before he could pump his shotgun. Drop it, she hissed in his ear. Gwam stood up, clutching his shoulder, his eyes locked on Tosin. He saw the raw power she possessed. The fire he had joked about was now a wildfire. Finish it, Tosin, Gwam said, his voice low. Tosin looked at Choi's terrified face. She was a bartender from Brooklyn, a daughter of Lagos. She was a survivor. She looked at Gwam and then back at the man who had tried to destroy their lives. With a look of pure disdain, she slammed the hilt of her knife into Choi's temple, knocking him unconscious. No, let the law have him. He's not worth the stain on my soul. Back at the penthouse, the adrenaline was still humming through their veins. Gwam sat on the edge of the bed as Tosin cleaned the wound on his shoulder. Her hands were steady, her touch medicinal yet intimate. You could have killed him, Gwam said, looking up at her. I could have, Tosin whispered, tapping the bandage down. But then I'd be just like you. And you don't need another monster in your life, Gwam. You need something real. Gwam reached out with his uninjured arm, pulling her between his knees. The distance vanished. The trauma of the night melted into a desperate need for connection. He kissed her with a reverence he had never shown anyone. This time, it wasn't about possession. It was about gratitude. As the silk robe fell to the floor, the contrast of his pale skin against her rich, dark curves was a masterpiece of shadow and light. In the quiet of the room, far above the city they had just saved, they found a different kind of peace, one born of fire and forged in blood. The high-ranking elders of Gwam's syndicate, the Hwanin, did not like change. They sat around a long obsidian table in a hidden bunker beneath Gangnam, their faces etched with traditionalist disdain. Gwam sat at the head, but for the first time, there was a chair to his right. Tosin sat there, dressed in a sharp, tailored black suit. She didn't look like a bartender. She looked like a general. She is a foreigner, the eldest member spat, his voice trembling with age and rage. And she is a civilian. She has no place in the Council of the Tiger. She is the reason you are still breathing, Gwam replied, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. She saw the Russian threat when you were all blinded by your own greed. She isn't just a part of my life. She is the architect of our new security. Tosin leaned forward, her dark skin glowing under the recessed lighting. I'm not interested in your traditions. I'm interested in your survival. The world is getting smaller, and if you keep looking at the floor, you're going to miss the knife at your throat. The room went silent. They didn't love her, but they feared the man who loved her, and they respected the steel in her eyes. Weeks later, the dust had settled. Gwam had restructured the syndicate, moving away from the filth Tosin had once accused him of. They were moving into legitimate tech and international logistics, using Tosin's family connections to bridge the gap between Seoul and the West. But Tosin felt the pull of home. One evening, as they stood on the balcony of the penthouse, she watched the planes taking off from Incheon. "I need to go back for a while, Gwam," she said softly. "My mother's birthday is coming up in Brooklyn, and I need to see if I can still pour a drink without looking over my shoulder for an assassin." Gwam didn't flinch. He walked over and handed her a small, velvet box. Inside wasn't a ring, but a gold key with a coordinates tag. "What's this?" "A bar," Gwam said. "In Dumbo, Brooklyn, it's yours. Legal, clean, and the most secure building in the borough. If you are going home, you are going home as a queen." Their final night in Seoul before her flight was a slow-burn symphony. There was a bittersweet edge to their passion, the knowledge that oceans would soon separate them. In the heat of their embrace, Gwam whispered promises against her neck, promises of frequent business trips to New York and a private line that never went cold. Tosin realized that she hadn't just tamed a tiger, she had found a partner who finally matched her fire. The intimacy was deep, a soulful recognition that their lives were now irrevocably braided together. Tosin stood behind the bar of her new establishment in Brooklyn, the Obsidian West. The scent of Nigerian spices filled the air, mixed with the high-end whiskey of Seoul. She looked radiant, her dark skin a beautiful contrast to the industrial chic decor. The door opened, and for a moment she expected to see a thug. Instead, a delivery man walked in with a single, massive bouquet of tiger lilies. Attached was a note in elegant, slanted handwriting. "The seat at the end of the bar is mine. I'll be there by midnight. G." Tosin smiled, tucking the note into her pocket. She reached beneath the bar, her fingers brushing the hilt of her favorite knife. She didn't need it today, but it was good to know it was there. Midnight arrived, and with it, the familiar click of polished Oxfords on the floor. The crowd in the bar didn't stop breathing. They didn't know who Gwam was, but Tosin's heart did a slow, heavy roll in her chest. He sat at the end of the bar, looking out of place in his sharp Korean suit amidst the Brooklyn hipsters. He looked tired, but when his eyes met hers, the weariness vanished. "I hear the bartender here is a force to be reckoned with," Gwam said, his voice a low, melodic growl. Tosin set a glass of the finest soju in front of him. "She's a lot of things, Gwam, but tonight, she's just a woman who's been waiting for her favorite customer." He reached across the bar, his hand covering hers. The silent tiger and the black diamond were no longer characters in a tragedy. They were the masters of their own world. "To the shadows," Gwam toasted, raising his glass. "And the fire that lights them," Tosin replied. Outside, the lights of the Brooklyn Bridge twinkled like diamonds, a bridge between two worlds that had finally found their center.